Okay, welcome again. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to continue off where we left off before. And before she knew it, Serena had devoured another book. But it was different this time. This one was a forgotten book. A book no one knew. A book that had been tossed aside as if it didn't exist. And yet its story was alive in her now. She closed the book's cover, placing it over her heart. Not good, huh? Ah! Serena had a tendency to block out the outside world when she was reading. And she also had a tendency to be quite startled when something, or someone, broke her out of her world-divining trance. She let out a couple deep breaths before facing the fox again. You really shouldn't scare people so much. You know, I could have had a heart attack. Sorry, I guess it's just my nature. At this, Serena gave her a long, calculated glance. This wasn't the first time today that the day of their fated meeting, that the other had said something along those lines. She wondered how the other meant her words, how she saw herself. Did she say those words with pride? Did she say those words with pride, proud of being intimidating enough to affect people? Or did she say those words to hide a fear that was eating away at her? Serena couldn't even begin to tell, for a day was barely enough time to get to know someone. You know, you're much more than what you are. You're not just a fox. You're Layla. The girl who showed me this amazing place. Who introduced me to this book, and probably many more. And I don't know if I could ever repay that. So, thank you. Thank you for being you. Serena gave her a bright smile. The second she'd given her that day, and Layla's cocky grin faded from her face. Instead, what replaced it was first a surprised look, one that showed that she was completely caught off guard by the other's statement, which soon molded into a smile of contentment. You really are something, you know that. Well, that's good. I might have a crisis if I found out I'm not really anything. As Serena's poor excuse at a joke, both of them fell into a fit of chuckles, which soon swirled into a tornado of laughter. A few minutes felt like forever, and they ended up laughing so hard that their stomachs ached, and tears of joy fell from their eyes. You are seriously too much. Really? At that, Serena's smile faded a bit. In her mind, she had always been average. Besides English, she had never really been good at anything. She wasn't crafty. She was never good at sports. She was quite terrible at socializing, and had very few, if any, friends at all. And the only hobby she could talk about was reading, a topic on which few people she knew could actively participate in without boring them to tears. You're more than you know, Serena. At those words, Serena turned to look at Layla's warm smile, and she felt all her worries begin to disappear for a moment. Somebody else was talking to her. Someone believed in her. Don't turn my words against me. But from the way Serena was smiling, Layla knew she wasn't upset this time, when she had retaliated like before. She was just playfully jabbing back, a skill which she hadn't had that much time to cultivate before with her non-existent social life. In response, Layla just shrugged. I couldn't resist. Serena was still cradling the book in her arms, and gave it another look. She began to think about why she had come here, and what she had hoped to find. And she found more than she'd ever bargained for. A story about magic, and using it to light the night sky for others to guide their way. Or, at very least, your own way. I love this book. I could definitely tell by the way you haven't let it go since you picked it up 3 hours ago. 3 hours? Without asking, Serena lifted Layla's watch arm towards her. And lo and behold, the clock had already struck 3 p.m. She let the other's arm go and said a silent apology, to which Layla just shrugged in indifference. It didn't feel like 3 hours had passed at all. And Serena found that she still had so much more that she wanted to look for, to read. She hadn't even come up with a plan or a synopsis for her novel yet, or actually studied for any of her classes, really. But perhaps, she thought strangely, she'd made some points on the socialization level, which, may even escalate to some friendship. She hoped. Did you finish your book? Serena suddenly remembered that Layla was already halfway through reading a book that she'd really liked when she intruded down the steps. Yeah, and started a new one. When Layla raised the book now to her lap, Serena noticed that it was definitely not the same book that she was reading before. This book had gold letters curving down its spine, and looked to be about a fourth of the way read from the place Layla had marked it with a small felt bookmark. Have you always loved reading? I suppose. I was a little more adventurous as a child, always running out to play and all that. But sometime after, I became a little more solitary. Books were my escape, and I haven't been able to keep myself from them. Sounds pitiful, doesn't it? Serena wondered what could have changed. Perhaps she thought people just changed, became new people over time. Somehow, though, she could tell something had happened to make Layla change. She could tell that something had happened to make Layla change. Though the circumstances might be hard to digest, she was glad that Layla chose to become an avid reader. After all, it led them both to this point. Serena shook her head firmly. They aren't an escape, but they also teach and help you grow. Books are portals to everywhere. How could you not want to explore them? To learn about all these places and worlds laying just beyond the surface? At that, Layla's warm smile returned. She seemed happy with the sentiment, and she couldn't deny Serena's words. Though Serena didn't know the details of the other's past, much like Layla didn't know her own, she felt content that someone else at least appreciated books and her understanding of them. So, what now? Do you want to find another book? Honestly, Serena had no idea what the next step was. She didn't expect to read a whole novel in one sitting. And she certainly didn't expect to be reading alongside a fox. But here they were. I think I need to think about what my novel should be about. Well, I'm all ears if you want to discuss it. I've got nothing but time. At this, Serena gave another curious glance. Why did the other choose to come to the labyrinth in the first place, anyway? Surely she wouldn't have known about the forgotten books down here. But it was something Serena couldn't quite bring herself to ask with how their new relationship was. I haven't quite sorted it out yet, but I will. I have faith in you, even though I barely know you. Which is weird. But I suppose not as weird as sitting next to a stranger reading forgotten books all day. Yeah, I guess so. Serena chuckled at that, unable to deny Layla's charm. It was strange how fate had brought them together that day. How they had managed to be so content in the other's company after so little time of knowing one another. Perhaps, Serena thought, it was just the kindred spirits of book lovers. Or perhaps it was that fate had something more in store for them. Alright, let's save it here. Back in her bedroom, after a decently short and uneventful walk home, the rabbit girl began to contemplate how her evening had gone. Serena spent the rest of her time that day at Labyrinth, staring at a notebook with a pen in her hand. She scribbled some thoughts down and then crossed them out, one after another by the dozens. Occasionally she would look over at Layla, whose fox ears were tilted in focus as she devoured another forgotten novel. Not wanting to bother her, Serena kept at it in hopes that something would come to her. I bet that she would have lost had she been putting money on it. I can't believe I couldn't come up with a single thing. Thinking back on it, she had multiple chances to ask Layla for help. Layla had stayed with her the whole evening after all, up until the library closed, just as night fell. In fact, Layla had told her that she would be more than willing. But she couldn't bring herself to ask. Not only was Layla practically still a complete stranger, but she also hated interrupting anyone. Especially when they were reading. Reading to her was a precious time that should never be interrupted. Unless someone was dead or dying. Which, fortunately, neither of them had to deal with on a Saturday. It just didn't feel right, asking her about something like that. A book was a very personal thing to Serena, something you had to put your heart and soul into. And she didn't feel that it was okay opening up to someone she had just met quite so intimately yet. Maybe it wasn't a big deal to others, sharing novel ideas out into the ether, as if it was a little more than pitching a sales idea. But to her, it was like cutting off a part of her soul and handing it to another. She just wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. You understand, right, Felix? She was sitting on the side of her bed, her fox plush's arms tucked between her thumbs as she held them in her lap. She gazed into his eyes, but she couldn't find any answer. But she still took this as a way of saying, you should do what feels best to you. But the problem was that Serena didn't know what that was. What should I do? It was the question that hit every young adult, especially those in college. And once you made the commitment to go to a university, especially if you or someone important to you sacrificed so much for you to be there, then you felt as if you had to have a plan, an answer. But But how do you decide what to do with your life? How do you make that dream a reality? But the more that Serena thought about it, the more lost she felt. The more questions that she had. She could take an infinite number of paths, but which one was the one that she was meant to walk on? And what if she took the wrong one? I mean, where did her story truly begin? Where did her story truly begin? If only I could wake up and just become an author. And just write and read forever. It was a dream that she'd had since she was young, cuddled up in her blankets with a book close to her. When she was too young to read, her mother read to her. But as soon as she could formulate sentences on her own, she began to pick up novels all on her own. Some of them were more difficult, not quite to her taste as a young reader. But she always appreciated them, and what they took the time to say. Even if she herself wasn't all that moved by it. Perhaps I should just write what's on my mind without thinking too much about it? But wouldn't that seem kind of... I mean, can I really just throw up... can I really just throw up on a paper and expect it to be good? For someone to like it just because it's my real thoughts on a paper? She looked down at her fox plush, who she could have sworn scrunched up his nose in distaste at her. She chuckled a bit and gave him a pet. Sorry for the analogy, Phoenix, but I just can't decide. If I think about it too much, then I just can't write at all. But if I don't think about it enough, then I worry it won't have any weight to it at all. And so was the crutch of the writer. To constantly worry whether the substance of one's work was enough. To wonder if it was too blunt or too detailed. To constantly dance between the void of thought and instinct. Perhaps I can ask Layla tomorrow. And she can help me decide. If she couldn't decide on her own, then she could always ask a fellow book lover. And the only person she felt confident talking to one-on-one in this town. She knew that the other couldn't tell her how to write it, as the words and ideas had to come from her own soul. But I mean, if the other could at least steer her in the right direction, then Serena felt that it would be worth it to ask. Let's hope she's there tomorrow too, Felix. Otherwise, I might never know when I get the chance to ask. At the thought of not being able to see Layla again tomorrow, she frowned. She knew this person was a stranger, and they weren't exactly friends or even acquaintances at this point. But she felt a sort of strange kinship with this girl, as a fellow reader and book lover, but also as something else beyond that she couldn't yet describe. A feeling that would take quite a bit of time spent with Layla and in contemplation to identify. You're right, Felix. I just need to stop worrying. I'm sure she'll be there tomorrow again, and everything will be fine. The fox, of course, didn't answer, but she felt that Felix agreed with her as she hugged him to her chest and laid him down against the pillows. She nestled herself into a comfortable spot, throwing the blankets over her body and closing her eyes. Everything will be fine. Everything's gonna be fine. She assured herself as she began to drift off into the world of dreams. Though, in the back of her mind, she thought about the forgotten book that had been tucked away into her bag. Wondering and worrying if she too would be forgotten in Layla's mind by the morning. And just as that book was forgotten and left behind in the darkest bits of the labyrinth. Or perhaps she would be found, just as the Starless Magician had been by her. She supposed only the morning would tell. Alright. Alright, I need to keep... So I'm going to save it again. One thing I want to do with these visual novels is... And I said this in the other video, but the audio was off. But I need to... Oops. But I need to... I feel with these visual novels, I need to... I want to make them good. I want to make them enjoyable. So I need to, when I'm reading, I need to stop focusing on all the little things. I want to start making content that you guys will really enjoy. And it's a cheesy line, but I liked it, and then no one got to hear it because my audio was turned off. So I'm gonna take this time to say it. But someone did tell me, someone told me that someone told me that to really make my work great, I have to really, not literally, but I have to really put my heart into my work, and so I have to really give it my all. And so I think what I'm going to try and start doing with these visual novels is really doing everything I can to give to you guys, and then I'll make sure to try and take care of myself so that I can give more to you guys in turn. And I will see as I continue, I'll see what the best way is to take care of myself. Um, and and if there's any more advice, I'm always open to hearing any advice that anyone has as far as to what I should do, what they think is good for me to do, and anything else like that. So so today I'm really trying to give you guys as much of a good experience as I can. If the way that I'm doing that isn't the right way to do that, then let me know and I will change. Do it differently. But I'm going to start trying to give it my all and to really make it an enjoyable experience, so that you guys keep wanting to return here and watch these videos in the future. I'm late again. Serena ran through her morning routine as if someone had placed an open flame under her feet. She had forgotten, with her mind so much filled with other things, to set an alarm to wake her up with enough time to get to the library upon opening. Apparently her entire weekend was going to be spent on forgotten things, her own everyday forgetfulness included. She wanted to spend as much time as possible there, not only for the sake of planning out her novel, but she had also neglected to study for her classes the day before, and she figured that she should work on that while she's here. She wondered if Layla would be a good study partner, though she assumed the fox, as a fellow reader, would be much better at helping the other would be much better at helping the other pan out her novel. Felix, you have to wake me up next time. The fox simply stared at her with blank eyes once more, which she read as, "Well, you shouldn't rely on other people's to wake you up." Which she couldn't deny. Why was Felix always so painfully right? She honestly didn't know why she was rushing so much. She didn't really have anything pressing to get to today. She herself was setting her own timetable on getting to the library to study, both for novel ideas and for her class studies. But the more time she had there, the more she felt that she could accomplish. So, running a brush through her hair and grabbing her bag, she bolted out the door. Oh, I hope she's there today. She really didn't like the idea of being surrounded by complete strangers, or being in a dimly lit basement all alone. Even a place full of books was intimidating if there was no one you knew around. Even if that person was just someone to fill the void of space that kept you from feeling like you were truly alone. When Serena walked into the library, she noticed that it was practically the same as yesterday. Even though this was a small suburban town with mostly college students, she found that the library was packed with people. Of course, she didn't recognize any faces, so she couldn't tell if these were the same people. Well, except the librarian, who looked up from behind the desk to scowl at her before her eyes returned to the top of her desk. She's probably running through a checklist of ways to murder me right now. Serena mumbled with a wary chuckle to herself, I mean, she obviously didn't think the librarian would hurt her at all, but but she did have a scowl that made Serena a bit uneasy. Like she was walking on broken eggshells. And she didn't even know the librarian's name. She must have made a really bad first impression. Oh well, trying not to think about it, Serena made her way to the stairs. She made her way down gracefully this time. Well, about as gracefully as she could when she was in a hurry to get to the bottom. She managed to get down them without falling down, screaming, or crying. It's progress, she thought. Layla, you down here? Serena asked as she cautiously made her way to the back room of the forgotten books, peering over the bookshelves. As soon as she made it to the back room, she held a hand to her heart and let out a deep sigh of relief. There, in the exact same place that she had left her yesterday, was Layla. Morning, sleepyhead. At this, Serena rolled her eyes. She didn't need yet another person to remind her that she overslept, though the first one was a plush toy who never actually said words out loud. Not that she'd ever tell Layla or anyone that. Part of me thought that you wouldn't show up. Oh, and why wouldn't I? I've been coming here for a long time. In fact, it would probably take me a miracle to keep me away from this place. As Serena sat down beside her on the carpeted, dusty floor, Serena noticed that Layla had another book half opened in her hand. And this book had a black binding, and worn silver letters dancing down the spine. She couldn't read the title, but she didn't feel that she needed to. Whatever Layla was reading was her own business. She was honestly just grateful that she was here. So, I have a question for you. Layla looked up from her book and her eyes narrowed cautiously as Serena began to unpack her bag. She pulled out the worn pages of the Starless Magician, her writing notebook, and her study materials, and laid them all beside her. She settled on putting the notebook in her lap first, and tapped a pencil to her lips in thought. And what's that? And what do you think makes a good novel? Layla leaned her head back against the bookshelf and closed her eyes, apparently lost in thought. Serena wondered what she was thinking about exactly. For the first few minutes, the fox had her eyes closed. Dragged on like hours as the bunny girl waited for a response. But after a few moments, Layla opened her eyes again, looking up towards the concrete ceiling. What makes a good novel to me is the heart that went into it. I don't particularly care what it's about, what genre it is, whether it's sold or not, whether the author is a good person or a bad person. What I do care about is how much of one's soul I can find within the pages. Because the more soul they put into their work, the more gripping it is. the more real it feels. Serena was completely taken aback by the other's words. She was amazed at how much care the other had placed in each word, and how she had never thought of it like that before. So this is the kind of stuff that Layla thinks about, she thought. About souls and hearts, and putting one's true self onto the page. And Layla really was more than she appeared, Serena pondered. So if someone just puts their soul into it, their heart, then do you consider it good? Well, I consider it worthy of being read. Which is about as big as you can get with books. I see. Thanks. Serena wrote that down in her notebook, wondering just what her soul would want her to write. It's not like she had anyone to ask. Her family never understood literature, and Layla surely didn't know her enough to know what someone of her caliber would be able to write. And once again, she began to ponder where she should begin. If it's from your heart, then I'm sure that anything that you write will be good. But you can't do anything until you start. And Layla was right again. I mean, how could she start her novel if she never even started writing? Perhaps the simple solution was simply just to write and see if what she wrote had any substance. Perhaps the story would just work itself out from there. Can I ask you another question? Well, it's more of a request. Sure. Anything. Will you read what I write when it's done and tell me what you think? Layla looked astonished at the other, as shy as she was. As shy as she was to ask such a thing of her, a fox she barely knew. But perhaps Layla had underestimated Serena. Of course. But why me? Serena looked down at her notebook, setting her pen to paper as she began to rack her brain for ideas. I don't have any friends here. And my family, they aren't exactly the scholarly type. Her family had grown up poor and couldn't afford much schooling. She was the only one in her family she could recall that had any interest in reading or writing. Me and her family all had hobbies of their own, though. Hobbies that she herself couldn't quite grasp. But then again, they couldn't quite grasp hers either. Sorry. I didn't mean to bring up bad memories or anything. No. It's nothing like that. I'm just being honest, though, when I say it out loud. It does sound rather lonely. The bunny frowned as she stared at her notebook, unable to conjure up a sentence for the moment. She had a family back home, but she didn't have anyone here. She was chasing her dreams, but was it really okay to chase her dreams all alone? Would it make her happy? Serena didn't know. If it makes you feel any better, I'm a bit alone too. I don't have any friends, or any siblings for that matter. And my parents are almost never home, so I pretty much grew up by myself. Serena looked over at the other with watery eyes. She couldn't believe that the other had gone through something so lonely, so painful. She wanted to reach out and give the other a hug, though the thought that that might be inappropriate with how little they knew each other. I'm so sorry. It must have been awful. Marilla shrugged, like it was no big deal. But Serena could see the pain in her eyes when she talked about it. She couldn't even begin to know what it was like to have parents that were never home, that never waited up for you, that never missed you. It's not all bad. I can basically do whatever I want. Though, I suppose that's not always a good thing. Too much of a good thing was too much of a good thing. Doing whatever you wanted all the time would be fun, but it would also make being unable to do things extremely difficult. And it could also make you do rash things, or for the sake of your own greed. Though she had believed that Layla wouldn't be the type to do anything bad. Not that Serena really knew her that much at all, though. But to have no one to spend all those adventures with, that seems sad. An idea hit Layla then, like a meteor striking the earth. She seemed to be shining so brightly, but then her face fell all at once. Serena expected her to say something, but she was deathly quiet. What is it? No, forget it. But Serena wasn't the type to let things go unsaid. She was the curious type who always wanted answers, always dug until she got them. It got her into quite a bit of trouble as a child, more than she'd care to admit. Please tell me. I promise I won't make fun. Serena gave her those innocent eyes, and Layla let out a sigh in defeat. She placed the same felt bookmark in her book as the day before and closed it shut. She set it aside, getting the feeling that this conversation was going to take up a bit more time than she thought, and she probably wouldn't be able to read for at least a little while. I was just thinking, what if we went on adventures together? At the suggestion, Serena found her eyes light up just as Layla's had. And what was it like to go on adventures with someone else? Neither of the two, from what they had said, had ever known. That sounds amazing! Her face beamed like a ray of sunlight, her mind already whirling through possibilities. There's so many places I've wanted to go, but Mama and Papa could never leave work or leave my brother behind to go. Meanwhile, I've had every opportunity to go places. But going someplace alone kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? I know what you mean. It's lonely. And they both brooded on the thought for a brief moment. But Serena didn't want to let that spoil the moment for any opportunities this possibility could potentially bring them. So, where do you want to go first? So, where do you want to go first? Wait a minute. And you're just gonna go? Just like that? Serena laughed, nodding. She dismissed the other's concerns with a wave of her hand. I know we don't know each other all that well, but this is a good chance to start. Besides, you've had plenty of chances to murder me, and you didn't. Though, you did almost eat me when we first met. I told you, that was a joke. And that's a rather trusting analysis, though. That definitely might get you in trouble one of these days. Tell you what. If I ever feel like you're doing anything suspicious, or I don't trust you, Then I will run and turn you in myself. I'm quite a fast runner, if I do say so myself. I'm also pretty fast, you know. Do you think you could outrun me? Let's hope we never have to find out. They both laughed at that, the mood going from dark to light. They began to use the rest of their time that day planning what they would do their next evening of free time, where they would explore. By the end of the day, Serena had finally made plans with a potential friend. Tomorrow evening after class, in fact. She'd managed to study quite a bit of her dull textbooks. And she even wrote down a potential opening paragraph for her novel. Things were beginning to look up. Okay, let's save. Oh, oops. I missed a part. But let me check and see how long we've been recording here. Oh, we have been recording almost an hour, and it looks like the scene with Layla is has kind of come to a close. So, but yeah, I'm really enjoying it. So I'm looking forward to continuing. Well, until next time, I hope that you're enjoying this. I hope that you're enjoying this series that I'm doing here. If you have any comments that you'd like to leave, feel free to let me know anything. If you'd like me to adjust anything, change anything. And if there's anything at all, just let me know. But until the next time, I hope you have a great night. I hope you really enjoy your day, and I look forward to seeing you next time. So remember, spread the love. I'll see you guys later.